Economist Richard Wolff is joining us again. He is Professor Emeritus of Economics at my alma mater, the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, also a visiting professor at the New School University in New York City. Professor Wolff, we need to talk about deficits because there is so much misunderstanding and just lack of information around deficits, their meaning, and their effect on the economy. So I think first, just to start as simply as possible, when the term deficit is used, the national deficit, what equation is being solved or evaluated to get that number?
Very, very simple. All the deficit is a measure year by year. It's a measure that it's about a particular year always. So literally, if you talk about a deficit, you should say the deficit of 2012 or the deficit of 2013. And what the deficit is the difference, the simple difference between what the federal government spends in that year and what it takes in tax revenue over that same year. In other words, if you have a deficit, it means that the federal government has spent more money than it took in taxes, and the size of the deficit is the size of the difference, the excess of spending over tax revenue.
Very good. So we see a lot of interviews, particularly with individuals currently on the American right, who say the deficit is too high. Now, if you were to ask them, well, too high compared to what? You would get a lot of blank stares. But that really brings me to my question, which is any analysis of the deficit a country carries in the absence of other information like the size of the economy, any number of other factors, is it really valuable to us in any way? In other words, is knowing the dollars of deficit really valuable to us in making economic decisions?
No. The simple answer is, unless you know the context, unless you know what else is happening in an economy, there really is no way to evaluate the size, the particular size of a deficit. So that the only real use talking about the size has is it can be useful ideological hammer with which to beat up your opponent by attacking them for having made it too big without ever specifying the answer to your good question, namely in relationship to what.
Okay, so that's a bullet point I want people to take away from this, which is if you're talking to someone who starts talking to you about the deficit and criticizing any administration or politician or decision, start asking, well, it's too big in compared to what? How big is it? And I think you'll quickly see a lot of these arguments will fall apart pretty quickly. So the next question is, if an economy is identified to be struggling by whatever metric is being put in place, can you improve that economy by cutting spending? Because one way to reduce the deficit would be if the government spent less in relation to what it took in. Can you improve the state of an economy by spending less?
Basically, the answer is no. But there is a bit of a caveat. The reason you answer first and foremost no, which any non-ideologically driven economist would do, is because if an economy is struggling, and if by that you mean, as we usually do, that there are unemployed resources, people looking for work who can't find it, equipment, tools, raw materials sitting idle and gathering rust and dust rather than being used to produce the wealth we need, if that's what you mean by struggling, then the last thing on earth you would want is for a major consumer in the economy, which is the federal government in our country and in many countries, the last thing on earth you'd want is for a major consumer to spend less on goods and services than they did the year before, because obviously if a major consumer spends less in the way of goods and services will be purchased, and that will mean less people getting jobs producing what the federal government isn't purchasing anymore. And so cutting spending will make an economy in recession worse off than otherwise. Now, having said that, the argument of the right wing in America, and indeed of all those supporting what are called austerity policies today, which are policies designed to reduce a deficit despite a recessionary economy, they make the following argument, that if the government has less of a deficit, so that its books are more nearly balanced, this will have a staggeringly powerful incentive effect on businesses and individuals to go out there in the market and buy goods and services in a way they would not have absent the improvement in the government's budget by lowering its deficits. There is very little empirical evidence for this, and so it sits there as an argument, and it is pushed by the right wing because really otherwise there would be nothing they could say to support, in an open and honest way, their support for austerity policies at a time of economic recession.
So let's look at the other side of the equation potentially, right? Which is that maintaining the deficit in raw dollars the same, if you grow the size of the economy, by comparison, in relation to the size of the economy, your deficit goes down without you spending any less money. Do we have analyses that compare the effect on an economy of reducing the deficit as a percentage of the size of the economy versus reducing the deficit merely by cutting? In other words, do we know anything about which benefits the economy more?
Well, yes, we have historical evidence for what has happened in the past. I think it would be easy to show that there have been occasions when what we call Keynesian economists, like Paul Krugman, for example, loves to point to these examples in history. You have a recession. The government, in order to overcome the recession, spends more money without changing its taxes. That means, of course, that the deficit goes up, but that the effect of the government spending more money while raising the deficit has such stimulation effects on the economy by the government buying more goods and services, more people are put to work, they in turn buy goods and services, putting yet other people to work. In short, that the stimulating effect of a deficit drives up the overall economy so that the deficit becomes actually smaller as a percentage because the economy is growing, even though you raised it in an absolute amount.
So, since many prominent Republicans, including Dick Cheney, have stated pretty unequivocally over the years that deficits, quote, don't matter, is it safe to assume, in your opinion as an economist, that the current obsession over deficits, particularly among the American right, is a ideological hammer, as you alluded to earlier, something used to confuse voters, maybe?
Absolutely. And indeed, Mr. Cheney is a perfect example. He made that remark about deficits not mattering at a time when he was the vice president of the government running big deficits. So it was important for him to say, look, don't bother me about this. This is a reasonably thing for us to be doing, and it will not represent an economic problem. The minute the Republicans are out of office, George Bush and Cheney gone, Obama coming in to replace them, then the Republicans turn around, find the deficit, as they have in the past many times, a useful hammer with which to beat up on the incumbent in the hopes of replacing him. So it's a perfect example of how this issue surfaces and resurfaces in American politics as a way for the right wing to make what is really a different argument. Remember that the right wing, traditionally in the United States, is anti-government. They want to portray the private sector as the dynamic, progressive part of the economy and the society, and the government as a burdensome obstacle, if you like, and that the government is bad and that government should be reduced and weakened. And nothing makes that claim more plausible than portraying the government as having overspent, run deficits, and so on. So you can make your claim about a smaller government by using the deficit when you're out of power as a way to try to get in power. And then, of course, when you're in power and you run deficits, then, of course, you have to be like Cheney and insist that they don't matter.
We've been speaking with economist Richard Wolff. Where's the best place for people to get all of your articles and podcasts and everything that you're doing now?
I think the best place to go is my website, rdwolff with 2fs.com. You'll see there these kinds of arguments and all of the work I do available without charge 24 hours a day. And that would be the place I would suggest.
All right. People need to arm themselves with knowledge. You need to know what to say when your friend says, hey, the deficit's just too big. Professor Wolff, thanks as always for being with us.
Thank you, David. My pleasure.